and hard, and they're out there giving up their lives so that we can possibly sleep good at night.
Certainly.
And we should understand that they're willing to give up their life for ours.
Absolutely.
Because there are negative people out there who's doesn't have your goodness in heart.
That's correct.
And what more can you say about the book, Breaking the Code of Silence?
It's a snapshot. It's a snapshot of my journey. And as I said earlier, I use it as a case study. I use my life as a case study. I grew up without a dad. My mom was my figure in my life. And I talk about how the absence of my father created a psychological condition that caused me to search and seek out through trial and error other examples of manhood, just so that I could figure out this thing called life. And I got it wrong oftentimes before I got it right as a result of his absence. And I talk about how that created an emotional wound within me that I carried throughout the journey, throughout the distance of my journey on earth. And it wasn't until I entered into the counseling program that I was able to connect the dots on how the abandonment I experienced from my dad sort of created this trajectory or this perception about life and human beings and my self-esteem and all these things that were impacted by that absence. It caused me to reach out and do things that were counterproductive in many ways. And like I said, I'm a person who was left back twice in high school, suspended countless times for fighting, had a very, very, I had a loving mother, but my childhood was troubling because, again, I was following the wrong crowds.
Correct.
As a result of that yearning for some type of acceptance or validation, I should say. And then, when I found football was my stress reliever. I took all my frustrations out on the football field, and it earned me enough notoriety to get a partial scholarship to come down south. And I just continued to progress and continued to try to find myself. And what I discovered, and I talk about this in the book, is that I had developed an ego that I didn't know existed. I was a facade. I was an actor in this big script called life, and I was playing a part that was inconsistent with my God-given purpose. And that's why I ran into problems and challenges, because anytime you step, I believe, anytime you step out of the divine will or the divine lane, you run into roadblocks and challenges.
Correct.
Which is why I believe, when I started experiencing the lawsuits and the indictments that I received back in 2012, I believe it was, for using excessive force, that was a telltale sign that I was outside of my calling, outside of my alignment. And it was that experience that helped to realign my purpose, realign my vision, and made me commit to, in fact, what I should have done from the get-go, which was counseling. That was my calling from the get-go, but I ran from it because, again, my ego said, nah, that's not what you need to do. You need to do something tough.
Being that profession of a police officer, how did your family handle you in this profession?
Sure. A lot of people in my family were concerned for my safety, but that wasn't something that registered to me. At that time in my life, I was an adrenaline junkie. I grew up in a neighborhood that caused me to be hyper vigilant throughout my life. You had to look over your shoulder. You had to be the predator, not the prey. And so I was used to being on alert, if you will. And law enforcement requires you to be on alert. If you want to, make sure that you don't get taken out by the bad guy, quote unquote. And so it was something I was used to, but I did not realize how that was also layering into a calcified perspective on life, which ultimately led to my breaking point of burnout, where I just psychologically couldn't handle the daily disappointments, the daily unmet expectations that I was having while I was in the profession, both from the departmental lack of support and also the community's resistance to my presence. And it just layered and weighed upon me, and I couldn't take it anymore. And this is, in fact, what many of our underserved populations are going through. They're dealing with a lot of frustration, a lot of stress, and trying to figure out ways to create or achieve happiness. And it becomes, you got two stressed out individuals. You got a police officer that's stressed out, comes across an individual in the community that's stressed out, and it's just a perfect cocktail for an explosion to happen where somebody's life will change at the end of the ordeal.
Describe that adrenaline that flows through your body when you're faced with a situation, whereas it could be either you or that other individual dying.
So there are certain circumstances, like I said earlier, the BLET shapes your perspective on how to respond in a fight, flight, freeze situation. And the ultimate goal for BLET, I believe the training, is to make sure that that officer goes home the same way he came in, that he survives the fight, whatever the threat may be. And what happens is in that adrenaline-laced circumstance where you either are going to fight, flight, or freeze, they condition you to take action in a way that eliminates the threat. And so, you know, we all have natural response. It's a natural thing that we do whenever we're startled. We'll freeze, we'll run, or we're going to fight whatever the threat is. And so BLET training, it creates the atmosphere and jacks up, creates a hypervigilant situation for the officers to have to respond to. But the problem with it is that officers end up patrolling almost essentially their entire career in that hypervigilant state. And if you do the statistics, the research, it shows that officers generally are predisposed to coronary heart disease because of the layered stress and poor eating habits, the fluctuating of shifts, assignments, and sleep patterns being interrupted because rotating shifts, whatever it may be. But it takes a tremendous toll on their health. And I've witnessed officers who have retired or officers that I've worked with suffer heart attacks that have taken their lives as a result of, again, I believe it was attributed to burnout and the culture of law enforcement, where it says you can in fact do this job and take on all the stress without getting help. And that's totally false.
Correct.
Officers need help, but they're not made to feel comfortable with receiving the help because the culture shuns it.
Okay. Let me look through your book and let's pick up a topic. What would you consider to be musical mayhem? That's one of your chapters.
Yeah.
Tell the audience a little bit about that musical mayhem.
Yeah, musical mayhem is, I talk about the concept of trap music and the idea or the metaphor of if, I have a home and let's say I have a mouse or a rat infestation, I put down rat traps.
Correct.
If I have a coyote problem or a bear problem in my backyard, I put down a trap to capture that animal or that wildlife that's disrupting my quality of life.
Okay.
And so when you hear the concept of trap music, trap house, the correlation is anybody that behaves in this type of behavior is in fact setting themselves up to be placed in a trap called a prison system. And again, like I said earlier, it's this intersectionality between the narratives and the culture and the conditioning associated with two populations that are at war because the narratives play into the hands of each other.
Okay.
And so musical mayhem is just basically me creating an awareness around the type of music many of the young population today listens to or consumed by, and they mimic and they mirror and they act out these behaviors in school, in their communities. Again, it's ultimately to feel safe because
Correct.
the way these communities and these norms are established does not give one permission to be comfortable with their own inner greatness. It's either you follow along or you become the prey or a victim. And so it's the idea that that type of music predisposes predominantly young black males to be conditioned that it's okay to catch a bid. It's street credibility if I go get locked up or if I go catch a body, if I go shooting somebody or go robbing somebody. And so there's so many other avenues to escape poverty, but those are not the things that rappers are rapping about.
Correct.
They're rapping about things that play into the hands of what law enforcement enforces. And that's where the challenge is, I believe.
Okay, being at Amir, he's at a young age. What do you tell Amir, or if you're a father and he has a son, being that you are a prior police, what should he do when he encounters a policeman?
Excellent question. Now, one of the things I do with all my children, Amir, Amari, Elijah, and Mariama, we have family meetings. And we talk about some of the challenges associated with not only our culture, but how to in fact conduct yourself, right? And how to be committed to who you truly are and not subscribe to these other narratives that people would want to place upon you because of the color of your skin. And so one of the things that we talk about is compliance. An officer is only threatened if he feels like he's losing control over the circumstance.
Okay.
And so if you present yourself in a way where you show your hands, in particularly show your hands, and do not do anything else until that officer gives you instructions, that should in fact satisfy the officer's level of hypervigilance towards whatever threat he may perceive. Another thing is the accountability of finding the appropriate people to be around.
Okay.
People who don't attract that type of attention to you, where you're going to be incarcerated or get in trouble. When it's like the Bible says, not to get preachy, but bad company corrupts good character. If you hang around a bunch of fleas, it's highly likely you're going to get fleas. And so it's about hanging out with people who are better than you, smarter than you, people who can teach you something, and not putting yourself in predicaments where you're hanging out with people who can't elevate you.
Kareem, if someone want to get in contact with you, how would they go about doing that?
Excellent. They can reach me at Instagram at SelfTalkCC. I'm on Twitter. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Facebook. And also, they can go to our website, www.selftalkcounseling.com, which is my private practice where I provide services for law enforcement as well as the community on mental health and substance abuse issues.
One advice would you give to our audience? It's short. Make it brief.
Sure. I would encourage you, be committed to being yourself. Be committed to your truth and what you are internally. And by you showing that light, it eliminates the darkness that can, in fact, stagnate your growth.
Kareem, Amir, thank you for coming on the show. And anytime you want to come back, I look forward to seeing you. Audience, thank you for watching the show, and you be encouraged. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of the Paul Brown Show. Senator Malcolm Graham,
Miss Jennifer Roberts,
Mr. Erwin Carmichael,
Representative Rodney Moore,
Ms. Donna Reed, Ms. Lucille Getty, Mr. Delton Adams Sr., Alonzo Lumpkin. So you be encouraged.